All right, guys. Today we're going to tie together some civil rights stuff. Some of this you read about in Section 1. Some of it is going to be new. So basically, even though slavery ended with the Civil War, after the Civil War there was an institution of segregation and suppressing the black population in America, specifically in the South, but in practice, pretty much across the country. Now, in the South, they had actual segregation required by law. In the North, it's just kind of how things were in most areas of the North. Okay, so the term for segregation and this system of oppression is Jim Crow. And as I said, we had legal segregation, which is referred to as de jure segregation in the South. Okay, on this picture here, you see two men who were lynched. Lynching was often used across the country, but more specifically in the South, to go around the legal system. And if a black man was accused of a crime, oftentimes he never got to see a trial. An angry mob would basically get together and whether the guy was guilty, innocent, it didn't matter. The person oftentimes never saw a trial and was publicly lynched or hanged. In the North, we have de facto segregation, which is just by practice. There were white schools and black schools, not by law, but that's how, in essence, the borders were drawn up. Okay, there was the white neighborhood and the black neighborhood. There was the white park and the black park. It was, like I said, not required by law, but just how things, in essence, were. So the civil rights movement is what's referred to as ad hoc. Like there's different groups with different goals. Some are more local, some are more national. There's different leaders that emerge, different tactics that emerge through this whole situation, and it's a very fractured and unorganized movement. But we see, if we talk about them under one larger umbrella. Looking at schools prior to the Brown versus Board of Education, the red states here are states that required segregation. The green states forbid segregation, and the blue states were optional. Yellow states did not mention it. So now, looking at the legality of segregation, segregation becomes constitutionally protected in the 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson case, which basically established that in Louisiana it was constitutional to have separate train cars. At that point, the Supreme Court puts out the notion that separate but equally protects people. But the reality of the situation is there is no equal facilities. Like the black school was never as well equipped or well funded as the white school. The black train car was never as nice as the white train car. So what was separate was never actually equal. So a challenge to this separate but equal case comes in the 1954 Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. There's a little girl, Linda Brown. She wanted to go to the school which was closest to her house. Instead, because she was black, she was required to go to school that was all the way across town, a long trip on a bus, across railroad tracks, so forth. And they end up challenging it and saying, hey, I should be able to go to the local school. It actually goes to the Supreme Court. Thurgood Marshall argues that they should be able to attend the school that is closest to them, not one that is assigned by their race. Now, school desegregation, the catch in the Brown versus Board of Education is the Supreme Court said schools should be integrated with all deliberate speed. Well, that's not very specific, and we're going to see many states in the South are really going to drag their feet. This brings us to the case of the Little Rock Nine. Okay, the Little Rock Nine are these 9 students here that are trying to attend Little Rock High School. The governor refuses to let them attend the high school. So in response, Ike, who is Dwight Eisenhower, nationalizes the Arkansas National Guard and sends these kids to school with actual military protection. So if you could envision yourself sitting in a school classroom with a soldier sitting in the back of the room defending one of your fellow students. We see school desegregation is very slow to carry out. By 1960, only about 10% of schools were actually integrated. Here you see a famous picture from the Little Rock Nine, and you have one of the members there walking her way to school. It's a famous picture because of this woman here and the vile look on her face that she's so disgusted that a black student would want to attend her high school. So this in essence is a snapshot of history and what we see. How we can reflect on it today. Would this woman have the same reaction today? So the civil rights movement, Rosa Parks, the civil rights movement is gaining momentum after Brown versus Board. People begin to say, well, what about other aspects that are segregated? Lunch counters, public transportation, so forth. So Rosa Parks is arrested for refusing to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. So she's arrested. She wasn't the first person arrested, but she's going to end up being the poster child for this. We see Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. then helps organize a bus boycott here in Montgomery, Alabama, protesting this segregation. King is actually arrested for this boycott, but it's very symbolic from jail. He's gaining notoriety. By 1956, the Supreme Court outlaws segregation or transportation. This really begins Martin Luther King's ascension to the overall civil rights leader. And we see it's the Southern Christian Leadership Council. So even though there was Supreme Court cases saying schools should be integrated, buses should be integrated, restaurants should be integrated, so forth, we saw very much in practice in the South, it just wasn't happening. So what was organized is a group of college students primarily, but you would have white college students, black college students, so forth, and they would ride these buses, mixing who they sat with and so forth, so that they weren't separated by races. And then when they went to the South, it was this effort to, hey, we're integrating the South, we're integrating the transportation system here. Well, these buses were met with violence. Angry mobs would come out. These buses were firebombed, so forth. They were beat as the bus would be firebombed. It's on fire. People are coming off the bus now, and they're running right into a crowd and getting beaten simply for trying to integrate these buses. So we see Martin Luther King Jr. is emerging as a leader here. There are other leaders. So Martin Luther King Jr. emerging as a leader. He's now going to help lead some boycotts, some protests, some marches, and oftentimes these were met with violence. The big change now is people have televisions, where this violence used to be isolated or just a mention in the newspaper. Now it's broadcast on TV. The whole world begins to see peaceful marchers attacked by police dogs or sprayed with fire hoses and so forth. And this is going to help the civil rights movement gain momentum and truly make change. We'll continue with this on Friday.